Speaking of selling your soul, let's not sell our soul. Dr. Dan Snyder is joining us again. Last time we had him on talking about the Liber Christo method, a field manual for spiritual combat. Today we're going to be discussing Father Gabriele Amorth, who is one of the Rome's exorcists, is what people call him. In fact, they made a movie about him recently, and I want to start off the conversation kind of talking about that for a second because I've heard a lot of interesting discussions about that movie. But good morning to you, Dr. Snyder.
Morning, Adrian. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Hey, praise be to God. Before we jump into our conversation, I was looking at your bio, and I thought it was really cool. You were a former amateur boxer and a U.S. Army helicopter pilot and a Gulf War veteran. That's amazing. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I lived a full life. Praise be to God.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love boxing, and I think it's an amazing sport, so I think that's pretty cool. But anyway.
Did you watch the Spence fight? I guess it was a pretty good fight Saturday. I didn't see it.
It was.
I was a welterweight, so I like the smaller guys better. So I hear it was a good fight. I didn't want to fork out the money, but I hear it was a pretty good fight.
If you can catch the highlights, I highly recommend. It was a world class. It was very interesting to see Spence looked like an amateur. It was very strange, very impressive. But anyway, to the point of the conversation, we'll
talk boxing next time.
Absolutely. Let's do that, actually. That would be a fun conversation. But the topic of Father Gabriele Amorth, speaking of fighters, right?
Speaking of boxing the devil.
Right, there you go. What is it? A Hail Mary full of grace, punch the devil in the face. There you go. There you go. But Father Gabriele Amorth, a very interesting character. So interesting, in fact, that Hollywood thought it would be a good idea to make a movie about him. So people may have seen the movie. So let's start there. Was the movie accurate portrayal? What is it? Does it get anything right? Does it get things wrong? I don't know if you've seen it, but what have you heard?
Yeah, I knew that since I did the developmental edits for this book. It was translated from Italian to English, and then I spent several weeks combing over it to just get it ready for publication for an American audience. And so I knew I had to watch the movie. I normally don't try. I try to avoid watching things about the devil and these sorts of things just because it gets boring and old over time, and I don't want to think about it too much. But I was flying back from Germany doing some training over there, teams and priests over there. So I thought, well, I better watch it because I'm going to probably be talking about it. So I put it on, and I lasted about 10 minutes, and I finally turned it off.
Wow.
It was so ridiculous in my observation and so inconsistent with my own experience and training and background. Not only, I don't think that they didn't consult an exorcist. I don't think they even consulted a Roman Catholic. I mean, it was that bad. So it was ridiculous. Wow. So I put on, there was an army movie. So I thought, well, I'll watch an army movie. I'm just trying to flush, I got to kill 10 hours. So I'll watch an army movie. I put this movie on. Not only did I think didn't they consult anyone ever in the military, I don't think they consulted anyone for this movie. It was just absurd. So I turned it off and just went to sleep, So yeah, Hollywood has no clue. They have no idea the reality. It is far more mundane and also far more terrible and incredible to watch and be a participant in this. So Hollywood doesn't get it. They're not even close at all. In their portrayal. So I wouldn't recommend the movie, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I thought about going to see it just to give a kind of my thoughts on it. But at the end of the day, I was like, I really honestly don't care enough to see it. So I didn't watch it. I'm not a big fan of those movies anyway.
Yeah, they have a secret. They have this. So of course, there's always the secret Vatican secret that they have to uncover, that the Vatican is hiding something for centuries, which is ridiculous and absurd. The only secret that the Vatican holds is the Holy Eucharist, which the whole world seems to be blind to. The presence of Christ in the Eucharist is the greatest secret the Church holds. But so the movie is completely inconsistent. The first scene, there was supposedly a possessed farmer, and it was for his first case was a possessed young man, a farmer in his mid-20s. But they go into his bedroom and they bring a pig, and then he commands the demons to go into the pig, because they've heard that might be in the Bible. And then everybody stands around with shotguns and they shoot it crossfire over each other to kill the pig. I mean, it was absurd. But I stuck in there for another 10 minutes, and finally it was just ridiculous. So
well, that's good to know. That's good to know. So let's talk about who the real Father Gabriele Amorth is then. Let's start going through his early life, because many people may say, okay, well, let's get into sensational things. But every people, of course, like to hear the sensational things. But a man is built by his family, by his culture, by what he was brought up in. So who was Father Gabriele Amorth?
Yeah, I think that this is what really the book goes into, which was kind of interesting for me. The Americans, our audience, and most audience want to go straight into the fun stuff, the sensationalism, the phenomena of exorcism. But this is a story about an exorcist in his previous life. Remember, he wasn't called to this ministry until he was in his 60s. He was 60 years old when he was asked. He lived in a very Catholic, rural Catholic home, raised by very holy parents. The very first chapter is saintly parents, two saintly parents. He received in that Catholic environment, in the Catholic culture, he heard his vocation at a very early age. I think he was 13 years old or less when he knew that God was calling him to be a priest. So he had a very classic childhood in a classic Catholic home, a very holy childhood by holy parents, and he was called to the priesthood at an early age. And then he spent much of his teen years discerning which direction to go with his vocation, which was interrupted by the Second World War. So he was also a soldier. And as most in that generation, particularly in Europe, but our generation as well, went over and fought in that war. So he actually was a soldier that fought, and he also fought against the fascists after the war. I'm also reading another good book right now. I don't do a lot of reading, but this one my wife gave me, said, "You're going to like this book." And it was In the Shadow of His Wings, about a Nazi seminarian that was forced into the Nazis and became a priest after the war, during the war. And it's fascinating to see Catholicism in the context of war. And Father Amorth battled against the fascists as the fascists tried to take over Italy at the end of the war. And he was a guerrilla fighter for several months, or maybe even a year or more as well. Had a secret name in a guerrilla warfare group. And so this guy, he was holy, he was patriotic, and he was thoroughly Catholic, and he was also a fighter, and he had a sense of humor, which was most people don't understand. People think you're the sour face. The picture on the front of the book is he's very serious, but he was a bit of a jokester, and he liked to use a lot of puns. And so he kept himself. He took what he did very seriously, but not who he was seriously at all. And I think that's a key element of a good exorcist.
Yeah, I think that's really amazing to think about, because we kind of have, like you mentioned, the American mindset is we hate nuance. Americans hate
Yeah.
nuance. We want the black and white. We want to get to the sensational things, the very Hollywood culture. I want to give me the goods, spill the tea, that kind of mentality. And I thought it was so fascinating that he was actually a veteran, that he fought. And you see this with a lot of very, very holy men. And Dr. Snyder happens to also have been a U.S. Army helicopter pilot and a Gulf War veteran. And I'm very curious, Dr. Snyder, what your analysis is of how the understanding of physical combat related to Father Amorth and his life as an exorcist in spiritual combat.
Yeah, I think there's many parallels, and this is where it became rather easy for me to transition and be able to work both in academic work, but also in this field, and try to bring some sanity in foundations. If you don't understand combat or even combat sports, it's hard to understand without falling into sensationalism. But this is an ancient battle, as the Catechism says, that all of human history has been one of dour combat with the forces of evil from the beginning of time. So we were born into combat, and we live in a battle of combat, in time of combat, especially now. You remember in confirmation, the old rite, and some bishops still do this. After they confirm the confirmandi, they slap them a little slap on the cheek to remind them that this you now are a soldier for Christ. And so Father Amorth just took this to the next level when he was asked to be Rome's exorcist. He took his experience as a guerrilla fighter and he applied it in combat. Myself as well. My work with Father Ripperger in the local diocese, I see myself as just a repurposed cavalry scout. What I did in combat, providing detailed battlefield information for the exorcist. But a soldier also understands there's a hierarchy. We've lost this in the modern church. There's a lot of charismatic modalities that just think we should just go in there and gunsling, and everybody it just turns into chaos. There's a hierarchy in every and there's an office that dictates who does what, just like in the military, the church in the same way. And so that jurisdictional authority, Father Amorth recognized very clearly, comes through the bishop to the exorcist. And so as a soldier, it was very clear to him, this is how it works. And for me as well, falling into order within the church and working in our model with Father Ripperger and Liber Christo, it's very seamless. If you have experience and even in boxing and combat sports, you understand, if you can't be passive. If you sit back in the ring and try not to get hit, you're going to get hit. If you sit in combat and you wait for someone to come get you, no one's coming. We used to have a phrase in the military: no one's coming, it's up to us. It's up to us to fight this battle. And so that experience in combat helps us understand what the enemy doing. These things don't change. It's the same shoot 'em up, as they say. It's the same battle from the beginning. And so if you understand combat, if you understand physical combat principles, hierarchies, types of legions, etc. This is I'm working on my next book, and it's based on legion, which is a Roman legion of 6,000. So if you understand combat, you can understand what's happening in the spiritual realm.
Amen. Amen. I think that's a wonderful analysis there. Now, Father Amorth, and what happened after he was ordained and he was living as a priest? Because it seems though there was a huge gap in the time he became a priest to the time he became an exorcist specifically. Now, what was he doing in that time?
Yeah, so as he discerned his vocation, he ended up being attracted to the founder of the Paulist order, and so he became a Paulist father. And those are the guys that they were the first really into multimedia besides Maximilian Kolbe. And so they when you look at the papal encyclicals, and they're publishers for the church. And so he was really not only a grandfather for the modern exorcist and exorcism, he was also the grandfather of the use of modern media for evangelization. So he was, writing in newsletters, distributing various newsletters, particularly on the Virgin Mary. He was a Mariologist, so he wasn't just a grunt soldier. He was a well-educated priest and a Mariologist. And so he was a big advocate for the Blessed Mother, and teaching Marian doctrines and Marian devotion throughout Italy and throughout Europe. And so he did for many years. He just worked in evangelization. He was an evangelist. He was a priest evangelist, a preacher, and a Mariologist. And he had used, at the time, multimedia. If he were alive today, on this show, he would be running these types of programs. But before he became an exorcist, this is what he did.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. The other thing that I think is interesting about Father Amorth is that he, like you mentioned, he had this sense of humor. He had this sense of respect for Almighty God as well. He was not just some stoic man. He was real. He was a very real person. We kind of have this idea of these exorcists as some kind of person pie in the sky, but this is a very practical, real thing. So why was he chosen to become an exorcist? And there's kind of a mythology around Father Amorth. I'm very curious about what is the truth and reality about they're like, oh yeah, he did. It sounds like the people are like, 1 billion exorcisms in 10 years. What's the reality here?
Yeah, he was working in Rome with the Paulist fathers. He was working at their house. He was, there was a Marian newsletter, Maria, I think it was called. And he worked really diligently with the bishops of Rome, of Italy, to consecrate the Blessed Mother, to consecrate Italy to the Blessed Mother. And he worked really hard and as his organizing, his grassroots background, political grassroots, all that came to bear to get all the bishops of Italy to consecrate Italy to Rome. To the Blessed Mother. And he flew around in a helicopter. And so during this time, he went and saw the I think he was the chancellor of the Diocese of Rome, a bishop, and just to visit with him, had an open door policy, just to kind of chat. And this is what I'm doing, just to keep you aware. And the bishop had asked him, the chancellor asked him, have you heard of Father Candido Amantini? He said, yeah, I've heard of him. He said, I respect his work. He said, oh, great. And he turned around, got a piece of paper out, official letterhead, and he hand wrote a note. I now appoint you assistant exorcist of the Diocese of Rome to study under Father Candido Amantini. And and he handed him a piece of paper. But he was so formed in obedience to Holy Mother Church, he didn't say, "Well, let me pray about it. Let me discern. Let me think about it." He said, "Okay," and he did it. And he went to his superior. His superior said, "Do it." He goes to Father Candido Amantini, who was really his spiritual father and trainer in this field, and he gave him the ritual of exorcism and said, "Read this," and that was his training. And he said 30 days he just studied the ritual, including in the Prenantandra, and it gives indicators of markers of a good exorcist, which is holiness, prudence, moderation, and all these things. And he just saw what it meant to be a good soldier, and he applied it to the spiritual life. And after 30 days, Father said, "Okay, there's a guy over there there's a farmer that needs prayed over. Go take care of it."
Now, you say that about him, saying that he realized what it takes to be an exorcist, and it seems as though Father Ripperger, who wrote the foreword to the English translation, he says that at the end of it, he asked for the intercession of Father Amorth. Is there a idea that Father Amorth might be a canonized saint one day, that he is well, I guess we'd assume he hope that he's in heaven, but is there a movement for his canonization?
There is, particularly in Italy, there's a movement for his cause. I think it's been opened, and so yeah, it's kind of a spoiler alert in the end of the book. They kind of talk about it, but yeah, there is in Italy there is a movement for his to look at his cause. You can't stand that close to the flame for that many years and not grow in holiness and become holy. Whether he gets canonized or not, there's no doubt with the work that he did and the souls that he saved. When you step into the ring, you sharpen yourself. You sharpen. The first time I was an amateur boxer and I got into the ring with a guy who was ranked 10th in the world just to spar, and I thought I was a tough guy. I thought I was a good fighter, and I realized, yeah, I don't have a professional career. This guy is so fast. I think he could read my mind, because I would think about throwing a jab, and he was already to my left. It was like Speedy Gonzalez. So you can't get into the ring that many times and either get knocked out or learn how to compete and be a very good fighter. And that's the way he was. So in this realm, it translates into holiness. So it was ultimately his holiness. It wasn't necessarily his fearlessness or his theology. Even Thomas Aquinas, I wore this for you today, Veritas, right? Even Thomas Aquinas is canonized saint, not because of the Summa, but because of his holiness. And so if they're pursuing it, it's because of the holiness of life that he attained.
Doc, he's a spiritual giant, obviously. What kind of a legacy has he left behind? I know in the popular podcast, The Exorcist Files, Father Carlos Martins talks about how certain exorcists have left behind certain tools for the next generation of exorcists. What kind of legacy has he left behind?
Yeah, that's a great question. His biggest legacy is to return to the reality and accepting the reality of the devil. At the time, there's one of the chapters, I forget which, it's right in the middle of the book. It's the chapter, His Eminence Does Not Believe in Satan. There's a cardinal prefect in Rome that had a problem and said, "I don't believe in the devil." It was very common at that time. It's hard for us to understand, but we're coming after the Second Vatican Council. There's a new evangelization. We don't believe in this medieval stuff of the devil. It's all superstition. You're just stirring up fear in people. And so he was the first to come back and say, "Well, you can call this psychological, but my very first case, the guy levitated, his very first case." And so he popularized and brought back to the reality of Satan and as a person, a personal entity, and not this idea that that it's just the evil exists. It's just a symbolize the evil within our hearts. That's his first legacy, is to bring it back, and second is to start to bring it back to Catholic norms. And which is working with the diocesan exorcist, and he gave a lot of good principles for exorcists today that they still use today in terms of practical application of how to sticking to the ritual. It goes back to the rubric. As you know, the word rubric is the Latin word for red. Do the red, speak the black. And a lot of guys are getting away from that, and they're drifting into kind of this more charismatic model of looking for mystical things. One of my favorite quotes is from Amorth. He says, "There's always a strong temptation for charismatics, sensitives, and exorcists of finding the quickest way to heal by going outside of the common sacred means to obtain grace. Those who seek quick solutions outside of the ordinary channels of obtaining grace," he says, unwittingly fall into the trap of magic. And the famous quote, "One good confession is worth 100 exorcisms." And I see exorcists fall into this trap. They're like, hey, they'll call me, "Hey, Dan, how do I do this? What ritual do I pray for that? How do I counteract this type of demon?" And I'm like, hey, there was a Jewish carpenter once who was also an exorcist who said this type only comes out with prayer and fasting.
Amen.
So ordinary means, prayer, fasting, sacraments, confession, getting the soul in a state of grace. This is what Father Ripperger's program does, and my participation with Liber Christo does. And Father Amorth really set the stage.
Unfortunately, I have to cut you off there. We're out of time. Check it out. The book, Father Gabriele Amorth, Rome's Exorcist out of 10, and the Liber Christo method out of 10.